I would definitely say this is one of the top 10 games of the system.
Yeah,
This is my
definitely
favorite
top 10.
Zelda game of all time.
Yep. All right, so make the claim for why it's the best.
Okay, again, this is the definitive 2D Zelda. And yes, there have been 2D Zeldas that came out since then, like the Oracle games on Game Boy and even Link's Awakening, which is also a great game. And then also, oh god, what's the one, the like Spirit Tracks and things like that, on the DS and so forth. But a lot of those always seem to have gimmicks. This is just a solid Zelda game. It really cemented the formula that pretty much was used in all future Zelda games of you need to find this many MacGuffins, you get a sword, you get this many more MacGuffins, then you can finally get the princess. Talk about not messing with success. Virtually all Zelda games after that, at least mainline Zelda games, follow that formula.
Exactly. And I think the other thing is it's a great little tour through all the cool stuff that the Super Nintendo can do. And it does enough with the formula of Zelda that it doesn't mess with things that fans had expected for the game from the NES, but it does it in a way that's almost like the perfection of form. I mean, do people like the original Zelda games or the NES Zelda games more than they like the SNES Zelda games? Yeah, I think you can make a case for it, but those people are probably more fed by nostalgia, because I think the perfection of form of Zelda from the NES is the SNES version, is Link to the Past. And they did a great job kind of interpreting it for Super Nintendo. So I don't think there's any doubt that's in my top 10.
Oh, easily. I wouldn't say
All right.
I wouldn't say the best game necessarily, but very close.
Okay. All right. Fair enough. Let's move on. Marquise says Final Fantasy 3, which I'm assuming is Final Fantasy 6, since Final Fantasy 3 wasn't on Super Nintendo. But anyway, Final Fantasy 3 America, Final Fantasy 6 Japan. Make your case.
Oh, do I have to? I've been making this case for years.
Haven't we all?
This is a beautiful game, and just recently there was a great interview with, oh man, I can't even remember. It was like the director, I believe,
Oh, okay.
of Final Fantasy VI, and he was just talking a little bit about how they put the game together, and they had basically a lot of people working together, fleshing out different characters, and kind of melding the storyline together, because they wanted, and they really haven't done it since. There was no main character.
Yeah, I know.
In Final Fantasy VI. I mean, you could argue there are a few stronger than others, but essentially everyone had their own story,
Right.
and their own focus. And it was a simple storyline. This was before, relatively simple, this was before Final Fantasy VII ushered in the era of overwrought, psychobabble-ish JRPGs.
Yeah.
And it's just beautiful. The gameplay is very tight with the Esper system, where you learn magic. Each character has their own special skill. The music is, I think, Nobuo Uematsu's best work.
I think so too.
It's just overall amazing. My favorite game on the system.
Yes. So we're talking about our favorites.
Yes. I don't know.
This is also my favorite.
Questionable if it's the best.
Yeah, questionable if it's the best, but I would say it is. It's also my favorite. I love this game. I have replayed this game many times, and it doesn't really seem to lose its luster. We talked about this a little bit in on the classic RPG panel we had at Con Bravo, but I almost kind of don't want them to remake this game because of how good it is on the Super Nintendo.
I'm afraid of them too. Yeah.
Yeah, and but I think that speaks to how good the game is on Super Nintendo. It really does fit that moment in time, and I almost don't want to mess with that. It's like when this is the best analogy I can think of at the moment, which should tell you something about my brain. But remember, you don't remember this, but I remember listening to when they would take Beethoven and they would make it into disco music. It's like, yeah, okay, that's new and that's current, but it's not cool, right?
A fifth of Beethoven.
Sucks.
Yeah,
a fifth of Beethoven, right? It's like, I don't want them to redo, the Super Nintendo version of Final Fantasy VI. It just kind of does what it does there. Maybe they repackage it a little bit. Maybe they clean up some graphics. Maybe they make it sharper. Maybe they do some things like that. But I really wouldn't want to mess with that formula. I think it's really, really good. And if they were to kind of retool it and make it into something like what they did with Final Fantasy IV, for example, on the DS, even that, which I thought was very well done, I think could potentially ruin the game for me. So that's how much I love this game. It's just everything you said and more. I think it also shows off what the Super Nintendo can do. I'm thinking the beginning of the game, while the Magitech, the mechs are just kind of walking across the snow with Terra in front, and they're just kind of walking across the snow in the mechs, and it's just playing this music, and it fades in and it fades out. It's in mode 7. You know, it just shows off the power of the Super Nintendo. So it just kind of works. It's the best. In my opinion, it really is one of the best games, and it is definitely my favorite.
And people might not realize that or remember it nowadays because it seems like a trope, but back then that was a very powerful image to have a kind of steampunk mech-like atmosphere in your role-playing game. Everything was swords and sorcery, in JRPGs and in most RPGs as well. And this was a huge series taking a very risky chance by throwing in slightly modern elements into that. So
without creating some kind of new IP, which is something other people had done, but nobody would imagine taking a Final Fantasy and making it into something like that. And I just think it works wonderfully well. So I would hate to see it remade. Anyway, we're getting off on a tangent with that. Arcus mentions Super Metroid. Now, I think Super Metroid is definitely one of the best 10 games on the system. I really like Super Metroid. The entirety of what, people know of as the Metroidvania kind of complex now, for me,
yes, Metroid.
There's Metroid, but Metroid to me never felt as clean, as as tight in terms of controls. Super Metroid for me does all of that. It's very, very good in terms of controls. It's very tight. It just works as a game mechanically and physically better than Metroid does for me. So I really like this as, for me, this is the kind of touchstone for the Metroidvania kind of game. And for that reason, I think it needs to be on the top 10.
Oh, I think it's easily in the top 10. I keep using this word, but it really applies. It's a very tight game, which means, let me define that a little bit, at least to me, what that means. There's little loose ends. The controls, you mean what you mean to happen happens.
Exactly.
There are a few loose ends in terms of story or gameplay. Not that the story matters as much here. The power-ups are varied and useful. All of them are useful in different ways. It's all and again, like Zelda, you get a power-up and it's like a slightly bit of a puzzle to figure out where you use it in certain ways, and certain secrets to unlock. It's not just a straight platformer like Super Mario World, which also had its own secrets. That's another thing. You have to have things to figure out in all these games.
Yes.
If you have an on-rails type game, at least to me, that's not nearly as intriguing. You have to have things to find out.
And that little alchemical mixture really comes to fruition in Super Metroid in ways that I think has been oft tried and seldom achieved. Super Metroid does that very, very well. It's got that discovery while also being kind of a puzzler, while also being just a completely legitimate platformer of its own as well. So I think it has to be in the top 10 best games on the Super Nintendo. Is it the best? Maybe. We'll talk about that in a little bit. Mr. K, the wonderfully always reliable Mr. K, talked about Chrono Trigger. Now this one is it has to be in the top 10. It has, in my opinion, it has to be in the top 10 best of all time on the Super Nintendo, maybe all time. Some folks said during the course of the week that it was overrated. I just disagree with anybody that says Chrono Trigger is overrated.
It's a huge game.
It is. It's and I think in many ways it's actually more replayable than pretty much any other RPG on the Super Nintendo.
I'd say so, easily.
I have replayed this game over and over and over again, more times than I've played even games that I like more. I have replayed this game. It's just fun. It's just so much fun to get into. It's always fun. It's always challenging. It's always kind of new in some ways. And it does have a protagonist, and it does kind of keep with a lot of the mechanics of previous JRPGs. But the music is enchanting. It's a very different kind of setting than most of the other ones. RPGs on the system, that is. And I think The characters are very good. They do have character arcs that are very, they're powerful. They're not just kind of there, which you see with a lot of RPGs. And it's just a damn good game. For a game that introduces time travel as a central mechanic, this game is extremely tight as well. It's, how do you introduce a game that does time traveling on the Super Nintendo and not have it horribly break the system?
Oh, yeah.
They pulled it off very, very well.
And there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different time eras, I
exactly.
believe.
And so many different places to visit in all of those times.
Mm-hmm.
And to be able to kind of keep all that straight is incredible to me.
And during the second part of the game, it gets a little bit kind of like Final Fantasy VI/3. The second half of the game is a little bit more freeform, and you can do things in the past to influence the future.
Yes.
Lots of different things, and it uses the mechanic of time travel brilliantly.
Better than I've seen in a lot of games that came after Chrono Trigger.
Most anything else, especially Chrono Cross. With the time
Chrono
travel,
Cross, which is not a great,
bit more of a mess.
Not a great game.
But
anyway,
this was a bit of a traveling Willoughbys of game design. You had some of the best folks from Square and Enix coming together. It was a Squaresoft game, but you had some of the best minds from Dragon Quest and Final Fantasy coming together to make this game. Just collaborating. It's brilliant.
It's something that is kind of a rarity in gaming. You don't see that very often.
Mm-hmm.
But I think one of the reasons why it is so good is because you have really good minds that know what make fun games going into it. The music is amazing, and of course, Yosunori Mitsuda is the composer of most of the music. However, it's often debated how much Nobuo Uematsu finished or wrote in the game. As well, so you have two of the best, musical minds of this era of RPGs coming together in the same game, which is pretty amazing as well.
Mm-hmm.
So it's hard to argue that Chrono Trigger is in fact one of the best games on the Super Nintendo. I don't think you're going to get much argument otherwise. DJ Conran, I know you're going to like this one, suggests Earthbound.
Yay! I knew that was coming.
So, what do you think about Earthbound? Is Earthbound one of the 10 best games on Super Nintendo?
I hate it. I'd say it's one of the 10 best games on the system, definitely.
Okay, tell me why.
So, unlike the other RPGs we've talked about, it's not heavy. There is definitely moving story in certain parts, but it's a lot more quirky. It has a lot more fun with itself, unlike even the slightly more atypical for their time period tone settings like Chrono Trigger and Final Fantasy VI. I just talked about how steampunk is a little bit weird for this time period. Modern day suburbia, American type suburbia, still not heavily touched upon in RPGs.
And it's not even, it doesn't even make that heavy, right? Like, so
no.
It's not sitting there going, in a world where blah 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 and blah, these massive gods came together to destroy humanity. It's not like that.
It's
just kind of this kid who gets trapped in the middle of something amazing, but it's just a kid.
But again, it's goofy. You have a bee come from the future and tell you that you need to go save the world because there's an alien, and he's like, okay. And then he gets together with other kids, and they got psychic powers, and they eat peanut butter bars and hit UFOs with baseball bats, and it's amazingly quirky, and the localization was great for it because I can see a lot. Well, if you know anything about Japanese culture, which I don't say that I do know a lot.
No,
it is easy for things to be lost in translation, and yet the sense of humor was kept over very well.
Definitely, I think I think there's a great argument to be made about the localization of Earthbound. I mean, they knew they had to make it a priority, obviously, because it's a game about a kid from suburbia in America. I mean, it doesn't have to be necessarily from America, but I mean,
essentially,
he's using a baseball bat with a baseball cap. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's, they just don't do that in many other places. Anyway, I think I don't know that I would put Earthbound in the top 10, and the reason why, I mean, it's not even because I don't like it. I mean, there are certain games you have to put up there because you respect them. It's like I don't like Bruce Springsteen's music, but I respect Bruce Springsteen.
He's the boss.
I mean, exactly. I don't really like Earthbound, but I respect Earthbound. That being said, would I put it at the top 10? I just don't think so. I think the quirkiness does cut a little bit out of it for me. I think this